I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. I'm honored to be joined today by someone who is breaking into the podcast world in a new direction for her, and that's Megyn Kelly. Megyn, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hey, Ben. It's great to be with you.
Why on earth would you want to get into the nasty, dirty, feud-filled world of podcasting?
Unlike that other safe haven of cable news.
Yes, where everyone's polite to each other all the time.
It's funny because I have been asking myself that for a while now, like when I've been considering my next step, like what should I do? What do I want to do? And what I like about the podcast world is that the relationship is much more intimate. It's much more meaningful, I think, with the viewer because they choose to be with you. If they're there, they want to hear from you. And, that's a more meaningful connection. But also I didn't want another boss. I didn't want to be working for some corporation that had to tell me, how I had to skew reporting or what the story selection had to be. And I definitely didn't want to work for, some woke corporation that was going to tell me certain conversations were off limits or I couldn't have certain guests on. So to me, this seemed like the obvious next step for me.
There's a trend that's going on right now involving a lot of interesting people, many of them contrarian thinkers or reporters who have built up enough of a fan base that they can support it, of going independent, basically saying, I'm going to have a newsletter, I'm going to have a podcast. And it turns out, you don't need to subscribe to Rolling Stone magazine to want to read Matt Taibbi or subscribe to any of his numerous places to want to read Andrew Sullivan. There's enough support and interest out there. When it comes to your own support and following, who do you think is going to be most interested in what you're going to be offering in this new show? And what stories are you going to try to give them?
I think people who are sick of BS. I think people trust me as a newswoman, and they know I'm going to give it to them straight, and they know I'm not in the tank for either side. I'm not somebody who's going to put on the headlines of the New York Times every day. I'm certainly more fair and balanced than that, but I'm not in the tank for the GOP at all. So I think people who understand my news reporting, who knew me from the Kelly File or my show on NBC, are open-minded to me and the way I report the news and the way I sort of cover the day's stories. And I think those are my people. People who want a safe space need to go someplace else. People who want thoughtful, provocative conversation and just no BS can come to me.
I know that you had a reputation for not having a high tolerance for BS when you were at Fox and certainly, throughout your career. That's something that really does animate a lot of the most popular podcasts is not being willing to put up with the dominant narratives of the day, to just assume that they're right. What are the things, the storylines, the threads that are currently running through major corporate media that you think deserve a closer look, more close inspection with a real critical eye?
Well, I mean, what's happening with Black Lives Matter, the movement, capitalized B, L, and M, is the one that's the most obvious. Mm-hmm. Like corporations putting the banner on, from everything from the NBA on its courts to corporations on their advertisements and their products. And one wonders whether they know what they're really endorsing. No one takes issue with lowercase Black Lives Matter, but the group itself is extremely controversial. It not only is it going to people's dinner tables and forcing them to raise the fist and say exactly what some of these protesters want them to say, but it is founded by Marxists with Marxist ideology. And their own mission statement up until this week was explicit about its goal of getting rid of the nuclear family. They don't believe in a family. And it's not that, people who like the nuclear family want only nuclear families with, a father and a mother in a home, but they don't like it at all. Like they think there's something wrong with it and they want to replace it, according to what they've said and what their founders have said, with only, no cisgendered, straight, male, female. It's like, what do you care how I'm living in my house? How does it affect you? But they think somehow it's to their detriment. That's just one of the many examples. But the group itself espouses a lot of really racist ideologies that I think mean to separate us by pigmentation, not join us together, not make us more unified.
We've paid a lot of attention over the last year to the development around the 1619 Project at the New York Times, some of the messages that are there, in part because we view them as not directly connected, but philosophically connected to some of the principles behind capital BLM, as you say. And the problem of that, of course, going into America's schools, being something that is used to tell children a revisionist history about the country. One of the things that I'm curious about when it comes to your perspective is that you have the ability to talk to these issues, not just in the typical, cable news commentator fashion, but as someone who does have a family and has experienced kind of the difficulty of having to navigate both the media life, the life of the New York City area, et cetera, and how biased that is and how much that can creep into what you've experienced. Have you seen that in your own life? And is that something you're going to talk about on your show?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, to me, it's hard because if you want to be an advocate, I don't think most people on the right or who don't consider themselves woke, which includes most people who are center and center left, they want to be an advocate for, against racism, against bigotry. But what does that mean? That's what we're struggling with in today's day and age. Does it mean, according to, critical race theory, that you have to walk into every room and begin with, I'm sorry that I'm white. I want to sit in the quiet and reflect on my racism, which is literally what that program wants you to do. Or does it mean when I see racism, I'm going to stand up against it. When I see somebody with hatred in their heart, I'm going to try to fight against it. I'm going to check my own heart to see what beliefs I have that may be anachronistic and unkind. But in our schools, because I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and we've got our kids in these great private schools and have for the past several years. We love our schools, but I will tell you, our son, who's now he's a fifth grader. Last year at his school, they learned about the American Revolution, and he came home and he could tell us about 12 slaves who really made a difference in the American Revolution, and we thought that was great. And he could talk about the bookstore owner in Harlem and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the conversation, we asked him, did they mention anything about George Washington? And the answer was no. So, that's a problem. We need, it's okay to add more in, but not at the expense of American history that he needs to know. I mean, that's just one example. I know in my daughter's school, in the 10th grade, the reading over the summer was Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Without any, I actually said, are we going to offer the counterpoints offered by Coleman Hughes? Who's an incredibly bright Black intellectual, he's a liberal. He's a center left guy. But he took down that book, for all of its factual inaccuracies. Can we at least offer that? Crickets, right? So it's I want my kids to be exposed to all of this. All of our kids are going to be living in this world, but I want them to have both points of view. And I don't want anybody offering the counterpoint, somebody like Coleman of all people, to be shamed they're even calling people like Coleman some sort of a bigot, or, if your skin is black, they call you an Uncle Tom. And we just have to get past that. And the only way to get past it is to start having the conversations more.
One of the elements of that Ibram X. Kendi book, I actually attended a conference about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where he was prominently featured kind of before he broke through to being the national, best-selling figure that he is today. And he talked more there about capitalism than he did about race. And that's obviously an element of the book, is him saying that they're conjoined together and that they both have to be defeated and destroyed. Why is it that so many white people or non-white people actually feel guilted into a situation where they have to go along with a book that doesn't just say, race is a problem, a significant problem that we need to address in American society, a much more reasonable argument, but goes further and basically says, no, we have to tear down the entire construct that makes America the nation that it is and has made it so very successful. Why are they willing to go along with it as opposed to question it? Is it just fear of what will happen to them if they do?
I think that's one element. But I also think the left, again, capital L, I don't refer here generally to progressives who, in my experience, are, normal people who don't believe in this crazy stuff that's being stuffed down our throats. No more conversations about anything or you're fired. But the left is all about identity politics, and it's all about sort of figuring out what lane of potential victim you fit into and then bonding with your fellow members of it and exploiting that because there's some sort of emotional payoff to feeling that way and to feeling like you're in this special club and you're working towards change. It's today's civil rights movement or it's today's equal rights movement, as opposed to, you look at somebody like Jason Riley of the Wall Street Journal, whose book everyone should read. It's called Please Stop Helping Us. And it talks about how Blacks in this country were actually doing pretty well. They were on the right trajectory post-slavery and post-Jim Crow. And it wasn't until we had the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson, where we, changed the welfare laws, we changed the minimum wage laws prior to that, that things started to go south. Anyway, you look at somebody like that who is living a very positive life. He's a role model. He's strong. He has real solutions for actual problems suffered in the Black community. And that just seems so much more helpful. Like, what are the identifiable problems that we can actually get our arms around, and what can we do about them, as opposed to just a more victim ideology? And I see it, Ben, with my female friends, who in the wake of the Me Too movement, I think misunderstood that movement to be more about like just grievance policy. How can we find ways in which we're the victims? And I think it's exactly the opposite. The last thing you want to call yourself is a victim. The last thing, even if you are one, even if you are, I look at somebody like Oprah Winfrey. How did she rise to the top? At a time when Black women were not doing much of that, right? Mm-hmm. She just forged forward. She worked hard. She didn't make an issue of these things that were an issue. No question she encountered racism and sexism in her life. But rather than stay focused on those, she focused on the most positive attributes she had. And she worked hard and she penetrated through all of that. Now, people today will say that's a racist message, right? You're not acknowledging the systemic things that are holding people down. Not everybody can do it. I don't happen to believe that's true. I actually don't happen to believe that's true. I think we can get through anything. And I think the way of doing it is not to wallow in negativity and looking all around yourself for reasons why somebody else is holding you down.
I want to shift to talking about media a little bit, with a bit of a remove now from the cable news universe. What's the biggest problem with cable and the way that they present the news, given that so many Americans express distrust in the media today? Is it just kind of is it a narrative problem? Is it a Chiron problem? Is it too many people trying to do too many things? What are kind of the inside the industry problems that you think would make cable better or would fix some of the issues that people have with it?
Cable's not going to get better. It's not. It is what it is. And if it's your cup of tea, no problem. I was in it for 13 years, but it's not going to change. It's a profit-making enterprise, and that's true of broadcast news as well. I think some people think it's a public service, and it's not about that. It's not about servicing you with the truth. It is about making money, right? Getting the viewership to go up, so you get lucrative advertisements, so you improve your bottom line. And the way to do that is to cater to somebody's worldview, and then press the outrage button and lather, rinse, repeat the next day. I used to watch CNN when I was getting ready for the Kelly File, and I liked CNN back in the day. This is pre-Trump. Yeah. They were fine. They were a little boring, but they were kind of straight down the middle. And it was like, I'm not going to be that entertained, but I'm going to get the news in a way that I can work with. I can apply my own worldview to it. Forget it. They've completely surrendered, right? They're part of the resistance, and it's unwatchable now. Who would watch that? Who's not a committed lefty, right? And I don't think Fox News is that way. I think, look, you're going to watch Sean Hannity, you are committed righty. But you're going to watch Bret Baier, you could be right smack dab in the center. And even when I was doing the Kelly File, I had a lot of liberals who would watch me. They wanted to see, some of my guests. They wanted to see what the opposition was saying, right? Some of the strong Republicans we put on. But we always put up libs who were strong, who were not just straw men, because we wanted to actually know, what is their worldview? What is it that both sides are saying? I don't know. I think that cable is also just, it's basically full of pandering, and it's full of individual fiefdoms now, where, the anchors war with one another at most of the places I know. And I know a lot of people at all three of the cable networks. They'll tell you that it's all one big happy family, but behind the scenes, it's vitriolic and viper-esque. And I think that doesn't lead to a lot of happiness. It's like, it's hard to be a really happy person when you're living the life of a cable news anchor, in my experience. It's a grueling 24/7 job where you're under attack all the time, internally and externally. And you may get paid well, but you don't see a lot of your family. And you wind up, at least in my case, asking yourself, for what? Because the only way to make your show work in cable news is to be all politics. It wasn't always thus. When O'Reilly was the big cheese at Fox and I was kind of up behind him, we used to go on his show. We would talk about culture. We would talk about law. Then it just switched. In the era of Trump, it had to be all politics all the time. And I sat off these couple of years, Ben, and I was like, am I sad I am not covering the latest tweet war between George Conway and Donald Trump? Not at all. I'm good. That's what cable does.
That's a much healthier attitude, I would think, just in terms of your own stress level and sanity.
Well, and you get to the point where it's like the cable news audience is very politically engaged. And so to some extent, they want that. They want just the latest nuance on the stories they've been following. And I get that. But what I'm hoping, like with the podcast, is we can broaden the conversation again. We can cover more than just a little political horse race, stuff that's more meaningful than stupid tweets. If I never have to discuss a Donald Trump tweet, I will win. That is a win for me. He puts out the bones and everyone chases them. Mm-hmm. And the media, they're just such lapdogs, aren't they? He tells them what to do and they do it. And it's like they don't stop to think that they're just, they're part of a show. Mm-hmm. And it's been pretty clear from the beginning. You'd think they would have learned by now. So I hope we can have, we're not going to be talking about like Social Security policy, right? I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about things like we discussed at the top. What's happening in our culture? What's happening in our schools? What's the messaging about our country? And maybe with, heterodox views, people who are pushing back against this narrative because they only really have the internet right now to do that, Ben. I hear them on your show all the time. I love the Federalist. I really do listen to every episode.
Thank you.
And I love it. I learn. It's not just this fight back and forth to talking heads. It's a thoughtful discussion. And I felt envy in listening to the Federalist. I love the editors over at National Review. I listen to Ben Shapiro a lot. I tried Pod Save America because I wanted to get the leftist view, but I couldn't handle that. So sometimes I listen to the Daily from the New York Times. But I learn more listening to podcasts, and I recommend them, and I'm happy now to be joining the industry.
Tell me about the places that you're looking at that you're modeling your show after. One of the things that I miss about the way that TV used to work is, and you can find these on YouTube and that type of thing, and they're kind of surprising. Johnny Carson used to be able to just bring some random author on and talk to them for 20 minutes. At a point when there were so few channels that there weren't a lot of choices because he had that kind of power. I feel like the ability of someone like Joe Rogan to elevate some of these younger, interesting thinkers, has been incredible in recent years, in terms of taking kind of oddballs and making them major names of discussions and turning them into real thought leaders because people would otherwise never be exposed to their ideas. Are you going to be more about talking to people who are already kind of known, or maybe people who haven't been in the eye for a while, or are you going to be more about maybe finding the little niches of thought that are interesting to you, guests that are interesting to you that people might never have been familiar with?
I think both. I think hopefully people by this point in my career understand what kind of an interview I will do, and I know how to do a good interview, and so I think I can make interesting. Even though guest who's not that well known, as long as I'm interested in him or her, and by definition, they're not going to make it on my show if I'm not interested in them. I have zero desire to do a bunch of celebrities. I really want to make the show more about the culture, the politics, and interesting legal matters in the society. And there's so many right now. But I would put on a celebrity that had something interesting to say and meaningful about, our country and who's involved in those things. But I also think, Ben, one of the things that I miss doing from the Kelly file is one thing that I developed as a lawyer was the ability to take large amounts of dense information and condense them into small, digestible bits that you didn't have to work too hard to understand. And I still have that skill. And I miss seeing that on television. So I'm going to do that too. So I'm going to have some shows that are not about the guest, but about an issue where I'll help the viewers or the listeners understand something complex, and I'll put somebody on the air who I think is really smart, who can help me do that, so that maybe they've never heard of that person, but they're going to leave totally understanding, for example, what happened, what really happened in the Breonna Taylor case, and what the law is, or why, when that cop shot Jacob Blake in Kenosha, why did the seventh bullet not make any difference legally versus the first, right? Like, what does the law say? And I know the answers to these questions, and we can talk about them thoughtfully. And I think that would be helpful, because right now you get misled so often. And no one in cable, you got four, like if I was lucky on the Kelly File, I'd have 5 minutes for a segment. That would be a blessing. Now it's like you can devote an hour to talking about these cases. And, you know, the Supreme Court hearings coming up, you know, that's going to be full of misinformation in the mainstream media. And I don't want to get into like deep, let's go back over every decision that, let's say it's Amy Coney Barrett ever made. You know, I'm going to walk you through every written opinion. But I think you can go through the jurisprudence as a lawyer and sort of give people bottom lines about a person and help them understand this is what the Democrats are trying to do. Here's the reality, so on and so forth.
Have you formed an opinion about Barrett just as an aside, just in terms of your perspective on it?
I think she's a brilliant jurist. She's utterly qualified. And in any other time in history, she would be easily confirmed 98-2 or 0, even if somebody abstained. But it's going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be Kavanaugh-esque, because that's hard to imagine that they would get that brutal. But it's going to be a bloody battle. And, you know, they are definitely going to go after her faith if it's her. I think they'll be smart enough to not put their fingerprints on that. You know, they'll have the media do their bidding on that. Like we're already seeing it with the Handmaid's Tale stuff, which is all baloney. And the fact that they're going to bring her Catholicism in it at all and like make her seem like she's some, you know, weird Handmaid's Tale, male subservient, whatever. If you've seen that show, that's not Amy Coney Barrett. It's offensive. It's offensive, but they'll get away with it because she's right-leaning.
You mentioned that show. I don't hear you talk a ton about pop culture. What elements of pop culture do you still pay attention to? What shows do you watch? What media do you consume when you don't want to be paying attention to the news and politics?
Well, right now we're watching The Vow, which is amazing on HBO. It's about the NXIVM cult up in my hometown of Albany and this guy, Keith Raniere. And that was a story I covered a lot while I was at NBC with Catherine Oxenberg. Remember her from Dynasty?
Yes,
yes. That was Dallas. But anyway, close enough. So we covered that a lot. It was a cult in my hometown. And but anyway, the show The Vow is amazing. A lot of my shows just ended. Like we loved Homeland on Showtime. We were big into Game of Thrones. Do watch Handmaid's Tale. What's the Christina Applegate show? It's I always mess up the name. It's like Death something.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about. I've not watched that show, but I've had a couple people recommend it to me.
Over quarantine, I watched every season of Poldark, which was really good. I like sort of that British stuff, you know, like Downton Abbey. I liked Poldark. I liked the offshoot of it. Gosh, Belgravia, which is a pain in the ass to get. You got to go to Epix and download that, but it's good. Belgravia. Sandition, which it's the TV show version of Jane Austen's last incomplete novel. So I got a little bit of like the love romantic, you know, that stuff going. And then I've got like Game of Thrones, kill, murder, blood. I'm a weird person, Ben.
Well, none of that is trash TV. I'm disappointed. You don't have all of your stuff is well, I mean, it's all high quality. You don't have you're not addicted to what's that terrible ship show on Bravo, Below Deck.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So I've never seen that, but it's not true that I don't want to watch any trash TV. If I had my druthers and all the time in the world, I would 100% be doing marathons of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and Real Housewives of New York, who I love. I love to watch those shows.
So do you have an opinion? Do you have an opinion about the most recent season, or are you behind? I'm
kind of behind, but I'm watching like the trailers. Like I know Dorinda's leaving, and it looks like Denise Richards may be leaving, and I don't know about Erica Jane. She may or may not be leaving. So I'm kind of like keeping one ear on it. But here's my problem, and the ladies out there are going to understand this. So I love my husband. My husband's dreamy, but he's an author. So he works from home. So I can never watch my trash TV. I'm like, Get out and go to an office.
So
I've got important work to do.
So I can relate to that, and the solution to that is to just be at one end of the house while she's at the other end of the house. And I'll tell you this, I've actually gotten to a point where it doesn't bother me at all if it's an episode in the background while I'm working. It only bothers me when it's a reunion, because the reunions, they just shriek at each other.
They're the best.
Nonstop.
That's the reason to tune in.
I can understand. I can understand.
It, like you have a glass of wine and a night to yourself. That's what you're putting on. 100%. That's what I would watch. It's weird though, because if you look at like what I read online, I don't go to any of those websites. I love the Federalist. I go to Real Clear Politics. I'm all over, like Drudge. I'm all over the news sites. So it's a very strange combo. Like if you were to look at my news consumption, my online consumption versus
Daily Mail, like tornado of pictures where everyone is either amazing or terrible looking.
I never go, like, when you log onto the Daily Mail, I sort of have the news page there to begin with. I like that page. Mm-hmm. I love their sensationalistic headlines. Yeah. They help me understand the world. But I never click the arrow to the right that shows you all the bikini bods, unless it's somebody who I really like. If they're going to show me Halle Berry in a bikini, I'm going to click. I'm going to click. I was like, I don't know how she's doing it. She's a feat of nature.
I do want to know, is just in terms of your plans for this show, have you thought about, when we get out of this coronavirus experience, are you going to do anything where you travel around the country and talk to people where they are, or do any kind of live events, things like that were kind of the trend in podcasting before all of this happened and shut things down? Have you given any thought to that?
I think so. I would like to do that. And I know, like, I'm partnering on my podcast. It's my show and I own it, but the people helping me produce it are Red Seat Ventures, and they know what they're doing in this world. And so they've been talking to me about that. So I would love to do that because, like, we have a place in Montana, like, you go out there, you just get a different view of the world.
Yeah.
It is not like the Upper West Side where I am now. And I think people like us, who are more fair and balanced minded, you need to get out of the Upper West Side every once in a while. You need to get out of DC, because you stay in these towns long enough, you feel like you might be the only person on earth who feels the way you do, right? It's like, maybe I am just awful, because everyone in my neighborhood seems to think every view I have is bizarre. Then you go to the middle of the country, you don't even have to go to Montana. You can go to Chicago, you can go to the Midwest, down in Florida, and you're like, I'm just not a far left person. That's what I've realized. Like, everyone out here, like, the Black Lives Matter movement is being led by all the white women here on the Upper West Side around me.
Yes. I have this running thing that I started saying a couple of months ago, that now my writers send me every example where it comes up, that, the real thing driving this is woke white women. And just watch, because they are the loudest voices in the crowd. They're the ones who are getting arrested for doing things. It's kind of amazing. What do you think's behind that?
They get in the face of Black people, Black cops, Black people in their cars, and try to shame them. I don't know for what exactly, but they try to control them or interrupt their dinner. And it's like, do you understand what you're doing? I mean, that's the other piece that we didn't get to before about, why these a lot of white people are so, agitated and willing to do all these like crazy things. And I'm not talking about people who are like, I'm listening, I'm open-minded. I'm talking about the real activist, in your face types. What they're doing is racist. Mm-hmm. Their pejorative view of Blacks and the paternalistic view of, like, I as the white person will save you. You need me to make things better. I understand partnership and advocacy and support and allyship, but what they're doing is something else, like changing the language at the university to get rid of proper grammar. I mean, you tell me how that is not racist toward Blacks. It is, but no one wants to say it.
One of the most iconic images from around the DC protests, which I'm sure you probably saw because it was going around quite a bit, was when this young white woman was yelling at a group of cops, and one of the Black cops just starts, like, telling her the gospel and saying that she needs, like, quoting Matthew to her and saying she needs Jesus in her life or something like that. And it's just like, who's being the aggressive person in this situation?
Right.
It's pretty obvious, I think, to people.
Ben, and they're in their Lululemon, right? It's like they're all in their Lululemon, ironically denouncing capitalism just as Lululemon did after it took their hundreds of dollars for one skinny little pair of pants, trying to tell the rest of us that we're awful and we need to listen to them. And it's like, now you see like the BLM movement, like they're sitting down at people's restaurant tables, like, and making people raise the fist, or it's like, this is no way to win the hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And they really went off the rails. There was a moment of unity after George Floyd.
Totally.
Right. And
Totally.
I feel like it's been blown.
Yeah. I need to let you go. You've been so generous with your time. But before I do want to ask you one question about New York City. You've been there, for many years. You've seen it change in that time in a lot of different ways. How do you feel about the direction the city is going right now? Do you think that it can make a quick comeback? Do you worry about it being in kind of the doldrums for years? And what do you think about the leadership that we've seen, or lack thereof, in the city?
I mean, I think what most New Yorkers think, which is Mayor de Blasio has been a nightmare. He's awful. And he's furloughing employees right now while his wife is making $140,000, or paying her speechwriter $140,000 a year. We don't need her speeches. We don't need her speeches. What we need is the trash picked up off of the sidewalk and put in the actual trash can. And then we need to do something about the homeless problem, which I'm on the Upper West Side. They filled 3 hotels here with homeless people with no plan. No plan. Then it comes out that a large percentage of them are convicted pedophiles. Those of us with young children, who are just about to give them like a little freedom, that's gone. He has no plan. He doesn't know what he's doing. He was the city advocate. He had no qualifications for this job, and it shows. So, thumbs down on Mayor de Blasio. But I believe in New Yorkers. I believe in the spirit of the city. And I don't think you can kill New York City. I think de Blasio's done his level best, and you almost have to tip your cap to him on the effort. Like, it was pretty strong. But New Yorkers can't be kept down, and they will continue. It's like the line from Jurassic Park: life finds a way. and New York finds a way too.
Megyn Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on the Federalist Radio Hour, and good luck with your podcast and all of its, I'm sure, amazing interviews that we'll be paying attention to in the days, weeks, and months to come.
Thanks, Ben. It's a pleasure.
I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.